statement. So we can see how you control your data, where you can see where it's located, everything. And keep in mind, data privacy and data sovereignty is really important, and that you know that your data is safe and we're respecting your privacy. So again, our audit reports are going to be here. The consent, why we are collecting your data. So all of that information is going to be inside of the Trust Center. Now, I actually want to switch back to the slides and talk a little bit more about privacy here at Microsoft. So inside of the Trust portal, you saw we have our privacy statement. And that's something that's so important to us. We want to make sure that all of our products and services are running on trust. And one of the ways that we focus on your privacy and building your trust is we've actually created these 6 privacy principles. And we use these when it comes to making decisions about data. Now, this is helping us determine how and why we are collecting data, and then ultimately what we're doing with it. So why don't we talk about these 6 principles? First, we have control. And that control we are putting for you as the customer. You are always going to have total control of your privacy, and you're going to have the tools to make the best choice for you and your organization, which kind of leads us right into the second principle of transparency. We are always going to tell you what your data is being collected for, why we're using it, and what we're planning on doing with it. And that way, you as a customer can make informed choices when it comes to what data you share and maybe what data you don't. And any data that we do collect, you can rest assured it's not being, shared or being sold. It's going to be protected with our strongest security and our strongest encryption. And, we want to protect your right to privacy. This is your legal right as a consumer. And like I said, the data that we do collect, we're not selling it to be used for targeted marketing. So that means if you're chatting in Teams or sending an email, you won't get that pop-up of an ad later. But at the end of the day, the reason we are collecting data is to provide better services to you and really make your overall experience better. And what that means is that we're only going to collect data when we can use it to make your experience with Microsoft better. Now, if you wanted to look at all the different privacy principles in full, again, that privacy principles and the privacy policy are in the Microsoft Trust Center. Now, within the Service Trust Portal, we have another great tool, and this is called the Compliance Manager. Now, the Trust Service Portal is available to anyone, whether you're a Microsoft customer or not. But to get to the Compliance Center, this is only available to customers with an M365 role of a global administrator or something with similar permissions. Now, the Compliance Center is going to give you that 50,000-foot overview of how your organization is performing against the compliance standards that you set in place. Now, one of the best parts about the Compliance Center is that you can set up alerts and really make sure that you're meeting all of those outlined requirements. Now, as an administrator, you're going to have access to the Compliance Manager, which will help you easily set up your compliance standards. Whether that means you're taking inventory of all of your data protection risks, or if you needed to implement any type of controls. This is going to be your one-stop shop to help you keep up to date with different regulations and different audit standards. The Compliance Manager will help you reduce your overall risk. And inside, we have a dashboard with a number of pre-built assessments based off of your region or your industry. That way, if you have any admins, they can customize those assessments to better really fit your organization's needs, or, they can just use them out of the box. Now, one thing I really like about the Compliance Manager is it can take some of those really complex, hard to understand languages around some of those different regulations and standards, and it puts them into a more simple, kind of easier to understand framework. And on top of that, you get those out-of-the-box assessments that can help you with your compliance needs. So when you do run those audits, you can see how you can make improvements based off of those different recommendations. You're getting more than just recommendations. You're getting step-by-step guidance on how to implement the solution that was recommended. At the end of the day, this is going to help you prioritize your actions and make sure that you're achieving the optimal compliance standing for your organization. One of the components of the compliance manager is something called the compliance score. The compliance score measures the progress of your recommended improvement actions that are helping reduce your potential risk when it comes to compliance. Now, the key thing that I want you to remember here is that there's a difference between the compliance manager and the compliance score. The compliance manager is a solution that's for your admins to manage and track different compliance activities, where the compliance score is a calculation of all those different activities across your entire organization. Now, your compliance score lives in the compliance manager. Now, one thing before I actually log into the Compliance Manager portal is I want to make sure you understand how your compliance score is being calculated. Your overall score is based off of two different types of actions. You have the ones that your organization needs to take and the ones that Microsoft is managing on your behalf. Now, inside of there, we have what we call our action types or the actions subcategory. And this is going to be based and scored whether they're considered mandatory or if they are considered discretionary. Now, within there, we also have preventative, detective, or corrective. But how about this? Why don't we actually log into the compliance portal and I'll show you both the Compliance Manager dashboard and your compliance score. Now, the way that you get to the Compliance Center is going to be by going to admin.microsoft.com and opening the Admin Center. Now, you do need to have admin credentials to do this, but from the Admin Center, I am going to actually scroll down and select Show All, and we are going to select Compliance. This is going to take you to the M365 Compliance Center. Now, this home page that we have here, this is completely customizable, and this is where you can see your organization's compliance standing. Now, you can actually move these cards around if you'd like. You can add different cards. So we can see here, right up front, we have our compliance score. So this is the Compliance Center main page, the admin portal, but let's actually go look at the Compliance Manager. So to select, to get to your Compliance Manager, right here on the left-hand slide, you're going to select Compliance Manager. Now, this is your overview page of your Compliance Manager. So we can actually see our compliance score here. And if you look, you can see that there are two different pieces that's making up your score. First, we have 86 points out of almost a little over 8,000. Those are the ones that's earned by my organization. And then we can see the points that Microsoft is managing and the actions that Microsoft would be responsible. Now, we can see that Microsoft has all their points, but looks like we have some work to do on our end. So if we actually go up and in our compliance score is we can actually take what we call improvement actions. So if you actually scroll up to the top of the Compliance Manager, you're going to select improvement actions. And the first thing on the list is a recommended enabling self-service password reset. Well, good news. We already know how to do that. So if you were to add that self-service reset, you can see over here, this would add a potential 25 points to your score. And if you actually wanted to see how these different solutions can contribute to your score, you can select the solutions right up here at the top of your navigation bar. And we can see all sorts of different areas and the number of points that are possible if you were to fix these. And remember how we talked about built-in assessments? Well, you can see all these different assessments that are made by Microsoft. So you can see this data protection baseline. This is actually one of those built-in assessments that are inside of the Compliance Manager. Now, this assessment, it has basically, there's a set of controls that are for key regulations and standards for data protection and kind of that general data governance. Now, with all of these different improvement actions, the more that you take and, the more assessments that you use, the better your score is going to be. And ultimately, the better your compliance standing will be. So moving on to our next lesson, we're going to explore some of the different governance tools that are available in M365. And your organization has all sorts of different data that it needs to protect. This can be the financials, the organization, industry secrets, or even personal information of its customers and your employees. And we have tools inside of M365 called Microsoft Information Protection. Really, its main job is to help identify, classify, and ultimately protect your business critical data. And on top of that, we have something called Microsoft Information Governance that helps manage the life cycle of your data. So that way, you're only keeping the data that you need to, and you can delete the rest in a secure way. Ultimately, all of these tools are going to work together to classify and protect your data to keep it safe for its life, wherever it may go in your organization. And we've already had an opportunity to look at the Compliance Center as far as the different compliance standards that your organization may need to adhere to. But we also have a tool that can help classify your data. So let's say you wanted to protect any type of sensitive data, like maybe credit card numbers or bank account numbers or social security numbers. All of these have a specific pattern. And within M365 Compliance Center, you can actually train the system to classify this type of data and then prevent it from being shared outside of the organization or maybe even being shared with the wrong people. Now, on the back end, the way that the classifiers works is it's using artificial intelligence. So you can actually leverage, we have what's called pre-trained classifiers, and these are all ready to use and, they're ready to go with recognizing certain types of data. Maybe it's like profanity or like credit card numbers. And you can even create your own classifiers, like if you have your own unique patterns with your contracts. As you classify your data in your organization, you can actually use different explorers to see the different data that's being classified and how it's being used. And then you can drill down into any label and see where it's stored, the last time it was opened, or who has seen it. And we also have the Activity Explorer to see where labels were changed and when. Now, another way that you can protect your organization's data is through different labels and label policies. Inside of M365 Compliance Center, you can enable labeling your documents or your emails. I want you to think of these like a rubber stamp on a physical piece of paper. You have total control over your labels, and you can customize them to meet your organization's needs. Now, some of the common ways that I've seen people use labels are like personal, public, confidential, or highly confidential. And the nice thing about these labels is that they are stored in the clear text portion of the metadata. So that way, if you have any third-party apps using that data, it can read it and then apply its own protection actions as well. And when you apply the label, it's going to follow the documents or the emails as it moves around. So that means it's always protected, even if that data is changing hands. Now, once you create your labels, you can then create label policies. And these label policies create structure around what can happen, like when a document is labeled a certain way. So let's say, for example, you have a project or a team who's working on something highly confidential. And you create a label policy that will only allow members of that team to view the document. And if they want to remove that label, you can actually require a justification to be sent to your admins before that change can happen. So I want to log back into the Compliance Manager, and I'm going to show you how you can add your own sensitivity labels to documents. So as a reminder, sensitivity labels live inside of the Compliance Manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scroll down here to Information Protection. And here, this is where all of the different sensitivity labels for my organization live. I only have 3 right now, but we can see that we have this confidential finance one, and I'm actually want to show you what it looks like and how it's set up. So we're going to edit this label. Now, first, what we have is we have the name and the descriptions. You'll notice that there's a description for admins and a description for users. Again, those are customizable to you. If we go to Next, now you can see the scope. Now, in this case, I'm applying this to files and emails, but you can also set it for specific groups like SharePoint or Teams. So we have files and emails, And now this is the protection setting that I'm selecting. So do I want to encrypt the files and emails, and do I want to mark them? And marking them, think of it as like adding a header or a footer or some type of watermark. In this case, I want both. Now I need to control who can actually access that information. So right now, I am going to determine, I want to configure the encryption settings. And right now, the users and groups, you can see the finance team is going to be the main user and group who have access to this particular data that's labeled highly confidential finance. Now, you can see access to the content doesn't expire, but if I wanted to, I can actually set it to a specific date or after a number of days that label is applied. So if we go next, this is where that content marketing comes in. So I can have it as a watermark and I can customize that text, or I can also add a header or footer or some combination of them. If we go next, this is what's going to then allow us to apply auto labels. So if we don't use auto labeling, it's just going to be a drop-down menu where you can select highly confidential and then it will apply and encrypt the data. But auto labeling, again, it's going to have a set of conditions. And in this case, if it has both an ABA routing number and credit card information, and again, remember, it's using that AI to recognize patterns of data. If it has both of those, it's automatically going to apply that financial confidentiality label to this document or this email. Ooh, and I forgot to mention one thing. Watermarks, which is what we have applied in this label, cannot be applied to emails. It can only be applied to documents. So you can see is when the content matches these conditions, it's automatically going to apply that label. And you can even have a message pop up when a user has met the conditions to apply that label. So I'm going to go ahead and select next. Now you can also add different protection settings. I'm not going to mess with anything here. And again, if you wanted to use it for apply this to your SQL databases, you can also do that. So there we go. We have our label. I'm going to save it. And our label has been saved. So this is where we can then apply the policy. Now the policy here, if we go up to label policies up here on the top navigation bar, you'll see that this is going to protect any of our financial data for our environment, in this case, Contoso. Now, this policy, you'll see I have a setting here. It's already published. But if a user wants to remove this label, so let's say it did have bank account information, that routing number, and a credit card number, they just can't remove that label. In fact, they actually have to provide a justification. So now, if a user is in a Word document or an email, it's automatically going to apply that label because we have set up that policy. So why don't we go ahead and jump back into our slides and look at a couple of the other compliance tools. A lot of the tools I'm showing you here today are designed to help protect your data from experiencing any type of data loss. I'm sure you've heard at the news at one point in time, another organization who experienced some type of data breach and data loss and the awful aftermath that came from it. Inside of the Compliance Center, there are a number of different tools that are available to help you with your data loss prevention plan. And the way that the data loss prevention plan works is through a series of policies, and those have conditions and actions that are applied to specific locations, like let's say your SharePoint or your Exchange. So if you had a data loss prevention policy in place, you can actually prevent users from sharing any type of sales contracts. And that policy would run in the background, and it can identify any documents or emails that's including those sales contract numbers or customer information. And then based off of those conditions, it's going to trigger an action to automatically block that email from going out that contains that information. Now, there are data loss prevention tools where you can look for any type of, let's say, suspicious activity, like users copying or printing sensitive data. That way, you can take all of that data and create policies to prevent it. Now, these data loss prevention tools are here to help you no matter which M365 application you're using, whether it's Teams to Outlook to OneDrive to SharePoint. And we know that these tools are here to help keep data from leaving your organization when it's not supposed to. But what about data you no longer need to keep? Because with all of the data that organizations are now collecting and creating, you can imagine what happens if you had to keep everything forever. It would be pretty insane to try to manage it all. Plus, imagine if there was a breach. The potential risk is absolutely incredible. And that's why you need to understand your industry or your region's retention policies. These policies are going to help you guide you on what needs to be kept and for how long, and when it's time to delete it, how to delete it in a secure fashion. So very similar to some of the other labels that we've discussed so far, you can create retention labels and retention policies. So let's say I have a SharePoint site, and this is for my team, and all of the information in it needs to be retained for 5 years. What I can do is I can apply a retention policy to that SharePoint site, and that policy would apply to all of the same items on that SharePoint site. But let's say there's one item on that SharePoint site that has to be retained for 10 years. That's where I would apply a label to that specific item for 10 years. The 10-year label would override that 5-year policy. And when you apply a retention policy or a retention label, it's not going to force your users to keep those files on their own desktops. So let's say a user deletes that file and it has a retention policy on it. A copy of that document is being kept in a secure location, and it doesn't have any impact on your users. Now, there are some documents that your organization has to keep out, maybe for legal or business obligations. So sometimes you're going to need a record management tool. Now, inside of the Compliance Manager, there's a couple different record management tools to help your organization and maintain and dispose of legal or business records. Now, an admin, when they add something as a record, they can actually block certain activities like deleting a document or modifying that document, and they can track the path of the document and all the related activity. There are retention-related record tools that can help mark and store the record for retention, and then it maintains the proof of deletion at the end of the retention frame. So inside of Module 1, we spent quite a bit of time looking at the different risks and bad players outside of your organization. In this lesson, I want to talk about the risks that can come from inside of your organization. And here's the thing. It may not always be malicious. Sometimes it can be simply an oversight from a former employee or a contractor. And I think it's important to understand when it comes to insider risk, there are a whole bunch of different things that can happen. You can have someone accidentally leak sensitive data, or maybe there's some type of fraud or insider trading going on. All of these are going to put your organization at risk. So inside of M365, you can build out different workflows to help you identify, investigate, and ultimately stop any type of insider risk. There's a number of different policy templates that you can choose from, or you can create your own alerts when some type of suspicious activity happens. Then what it will do is it will actually walk you through the investigation and remediation. And sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's just reminding of an employee of a policy, or there's times that it might require a full-blown investigation. And here's the thing. Communication is incredibly important within organizations, but sometimes you need to restrict communication between teams within an organization. Maybe this can be for legal reasons, or maybe you need to protect employee data. Either way, you can set up what we call information barriers inside of your M365 applications. That way, if you do need to prevent groups of employees from interacting with one another, you can do so. So, in our first session, we spent quite a bit of time discussing just-in-time access, where you're only giving a user the access they need for a very specific amount of time. M365 also offers a tool called Privileged Access Management, and this is where you operate under a zero standing access, very similar to the zero trust model we discussed in Module 1. Zero standing access makes it so any user who needs privileged access must request it and only have that access for the time that they need it. This is just another way to protect yourself against any type of insider risk. Now you might be saying, going, hey, privileged access management may sound a lot like privileged identity management. So you might be asking yourself, what's the difference? Privileged access management is defined and scoped at the task level, where Azure Active Directory Privileged Identity Management applies protection at the role level with the ability to execute multiple tasks. Azure Active Directory Privileged Identity Management really focuses on allowing managed access for Active Directory roles and role groups, while Privileged Access Management in M365 only applies at the task level. There's one last area that I want to talk about when it comes to insider risk, and that's what happens if you need to let maybe like a Microsoft engineer log into your environment with you to help out with a support ticket. And remember how I said we really want to protect your data here at Microsoft? I mean, that includes protecting it from us as well. You have total sovereignty over your data. We can't see it unless you give us explicit permission. And that permission and that access comes to what we call the customer lockbox. Now, when you need a Microsoft representative to log into your environment, you have to provide explicit permission for a certain area, and it's for a predefined amount of time. Once that time expires, you have to submit a new request. Now, this actually may sound familiar to the Privileged Identity Management, and there is a difference between the Privileged Identity Manager and the Customer Lockbox. So the Customer Lockbox is allowing a level of access when a Microsoft employee accesses your data. Privileged Access Management allows granular access control within your organization for all of your different M365 tasks. So make sure that you understand the differences between those two. That actually takes us to our final lesson. Can you believe it? This is the last lesson of the full SC900 class. It's hard to believe we're already here. But for our last area of M365 today, I want to spend some time discussing what tools are available to you and your organization in case you're involved in any type of audit or legal situation. Now, I hope it never happens to you, but there may be a point in time where your organization is involved in some type of litigation. And when that happens, you're going to need to pull some type of information for evidence. Now, the good news is that this information is usually coming in some type of electronic form. Maybe it's emails or Teams conversations. And inside of M365, we have something called EDiscovery. This tool allows you to search across all the different platforms and applications. Now, you do need to have some type of administrative role in order to run a search, but it's a very simple process. So when you're running a search, you need to select the areas that you want to search. Let's say, for example, you want to search Exchange and Teams. Well, then what you're doing is you're adding filters like date, usernames, keywords. And that search, what it's going to do is it's going to pull a list of results. And then from there, you get to take some sort of action, like maybe you're exporting the files or you're creating a report. Now, when you're working with the EDiscovery tool, there are two different workflows. You have your core EDiscovery workflow and you have your advanced EDiscovery workflow. With the core EDiscovery workflow, you're going to first create a case, and then you're assigning a user. That user can search content, and it's marking it for download. Now, inside of EDiscovery, you can place a hold on content that might be needed for the case. And then once you have all of your content, you can either export it as individual files, or you can create one joint document. And after the legal case is closed, you can actually turn off any holds that you might have placed. And just so you know, there's actually a grace period after you turn off a hold of 30 days, just in case you need to reopen it. Now, really the main difference between the core workflow and the advanced workflow is that you can add custodians to the case. And the custodians are people who have administrative control of a document or an electronic file that could be relevant to the case. And after you search and you collect all the data, it goes through review to ensure that all of the data that's been pulled is appropriate and relevant to the case. Now, even if you aren't involved in any type of litigation, As admins, you may need to audit activity. For example, did an administrator reset a password? Did a user change a setting for a team in Microsoft Teams? A unified audit log supports the search of many users or activities across all of your M365 services. When an admin audits an activity, that audit record is generated and it's going to be stored for 90 days. This allows you to search different activities, IP addresses, users, and so much more. And all of these items can be exported to a CSV file. The advanced audit keeps all Exchange, SharePoint, and Azure Active Directory audit records for 1 year. And keeping audit records for longer periods can help with, let's say, ongoing forensic or compliance investigations. Microsoft now has the capability to keep audit logs for 10 years. At the end of the day, your admins have to have the ability to keep their eye on the activity in your organization. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of Module 4. We've covered quite a bit today. We spent time looking at the Compliance Center and different tools that are available to your admins. Just think about some of the different tools we've looked at. We've looked at labels, data loss prevention tools, audit capabilities, all in M365. All of the information we've covered today, as well as the information in Part 1, is going to help you prepare for the SC900 exam. Again, all of this content is available for free on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/scfunpath. My recommendation is that you go through each of the modules in the learning path just one more time. Take those knowledge checks. This is a good chance for you to review and maybe see areas where you need some additional studying. And if you are planning on the SC900 exam, which I hope you are, you can expect about 50 questions on the exam. These are all going to be multiple choice questions, and you won't have any labs. And really, the main focus of the exam is going to be identifying and describing different services and concepts that we've covered in the material. You're going to have 1 hour to take the exam, so it's more than enough time to make sure that you're reading each question entirely and reading all of the answers before choosing your response. Now, I know exams can be incredibly stressful, but I'm confident between these 2 sessions and the learning path, you're going to have everything you need to be successful. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me for both of these SC900 sessions. I hope you learned something new, and maybe now you have an interest in learning more about security inside of Azure and M365. Good luck to those of you who are planning on taking the exam, and be sure to add these skills on your LinkedIn page and show off those badges once you pass your exam. I'll be sure to see you next time. Bye, everyone.